I never thought that unlocking my own front door would feel like trespassing. We'd been gone 3 months. My husband needed that treatment retreat. It was our last shot, and we both knew it. I held his hand through every labored breath, through every whispered apology for the pain he couldn't spare me. He died a week ago. Quiet, just a sigh, and then nothing. I still hadn't cried. I was holding everything, and like my body knew it'd break if I let anything out. So, when I pulled into our driveway, I thought maybe I'd feel something again. Comfort, maybe peace, maybe just the thinnest thread of familiarity to keep me from falling apart. I slid the key into the lock. That's when the door flew open from the inside. She was young, mid-30s, maybe. Expensive blouse, carefully done makeup, a little boy clinging to her thigh like a barnacle. She didn't look confused. She didn't look apologetic. She looked like she belonged. "You must be his wife," she said. Not warmly, not even politely. Cold, dismissive. "But this house will be mine now. Get lost." She closed the door behind her, not slamming it. That would have given me something to react to. No, she did it with a deliberate softness, like I was a problem. She didn't want to stir. I didn't knock again. I didn't shout. I didn't even move. I just stood there, keys still in my hand, feeling like someone had taken a crowbar to the center of my chest. My mouth opened. Nothing came out. I backed down the steps slowly, like my body didn't want to turn its back on her until it knew I was out of range. I got into the car and closed the door. My hands wouldn't let go of the wheel. I stared straight ahead, lungs burning from how shallow I was breathing. There had been a child in my house with her, a child who called my husband something. I tried to tell myself, maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe she was a tenant, a house sitter. But no, she knew me, knew who I was, and she said it like it meant nothing. I started the engine, and the sound of it felt foreign.
Wrong.
Like I was sitting in someone else's car, on someone else's street. I didn't go inside again. I didn't call the police. I didn't text my son. I drove, not far, just back to the condo I kept for my working days. Small, paid off. I hadn't slept there in years. Not since Cliff and I made our final move into the family home. The home where we raised our boy. Where we had birthday parties and sick days and long talks at midnight. Where we made vows again and again just by surviving one hard year after another. That home, my home, and now apparently hers. I sat in the condo parking lot for almost 20 minutes before going inside. I didn't even bring in my suitcase. I just poured a cup of water, sat down at the tiny kitchen table, and stared at my hands. I still had my wedding ring on. I twisted it once, then left it there, and then I whispered to no one in particular. She knew where the keys were. I stood in my small condo kitchen, holding the steering wheel in my memory like I hadn't let go. I hadn't cried. I hadn't screamed. That scared me more than anything. The numbness, the way everything just floated past like I was watching my life through glass. "Who is she, Cliff?" I whispered. I waited like he might answer, like he might chuckle and say, "Nobody, baby. Just some scam artist who's about to regret underestimating you." But there was only silence and the distant hum of the refrigerator. I turned to the hallway mirror. I almost didn't recognize the woman in the reflection. Her shoulders were slumped like she hadn't carried anything straight in weeks. Her mouth was pinched like she was trying not to taste what life had just handed her. Her eyes, my eyes, looked gray. I looked 20 years older, I murmured. That hit me, because I wasn't young to begin with. I sat back down at the table, tea untouched, fingers curled around the mug like a lifeline. I stared at the framed photo again. I searched his face, trying to remember. Had he ever slipped up? Had he ever said a name I didn't know?
No.
Cliff was careful. Always was. Even when we were young and broke and fighting over utility bills, he'd always told me everything. Or maybe I just thought he did. What kind of woman answers a dead man's door like that? Like she was expecting me. Like she knew I'd show up and that she'd have the upper hand. I replayed her words again. "But this house will be mine now." Not is, will be. Like there was something she knew that I didn't. The boy had looked about 6, 7 maybe. Brown curls. Didn't say a word. just clung to her like a barnacle. Like he knew better than to interrupt something ugly. My stomach twisted. Cliff had secrets. That much was clear. But how many? And why hadn't my own son told me? I got up, poured the tea down the drain. My hands were trembling now. Not from fear, not from sadness, from something colder, more deliberate. If she thought I'd just walk away, she hadn't met the version of me that Cliff built. The one who stayed through every storm. The one who didn't flinch when life threw a punch. I looked back at the photo one last time. Whoever she is, I said aloud, she's not staying in my house. And I meant it. 34 years. That number hit me like a stone as I sat cross-legged on the bedroom floor. A box of photo albums spread around me like relics at a crime scene. I held a picture of us at the hospital after our son was born. Cliff, with his wild hair and that look on his face like he couldn't believe something that small could carry his whole heart. We built a life, brick by brick, fight by fight, year by year. I pulled out a photo from our 25th anniversary. Me in a blue dress, Cliff said, made me look dangerous. He waltzed with me in the kitchen, barefoot, tipsy on cheap champagne. He kissed my hand and said, "If anything happens to me, this house is yours always." I remember laughing and calling him dramatic. God help me, I believed him. What a fool I was. Was I ever really his wife in the end, or just a placeholder until whatever this was moved in? I traced the edge of a photo. Cliff and our son building the backyard deck together, shirts off, sweat-drenched and smiling. The sun setting behind them like a painting. I remember that day so vividly because I brought them lemonade and Cliff said, "This is what heaven must feel like now." I didn't even know who he'd been. What kind of man prepares two lives? And what kind of mother did I raise if my son knew and said nothing? I should have noticed her at the funeral back then. She was just a blurred face in the back row. Someone I assumed came with the hospice team, or maybe from his old workplace. She wore black, but her lipstick was too red. Her shoes too expensive. She left before the service ended, slipped out like the grief wasn't hers to carry. But now I remembered. Now I saw it all differently because that was her. That woman, Chelsea. I was standing by his grave, numb and winded, listening to the minister fumble through verses Cliff had never believed in when I felt a set of eyes watching me. Not kind, not tearful, just watching. She wasn't crying. She wasn't even pretending to. She didn't approach me afterward. Didn't offer condolences. Didn't say a word. That day I thought maybe she was someone from the cancer center, someone too shy to speak. But now I knew better. That was not shyness in her eyes. That was ownership. She knew. Back then, before the body was even cold, she knew she was going to walk into my home like it was hers. She was waiting. That service wasn't for Cliff. It was for show. A formality to cross off her list before she took what she believed she was owed. And then it struck me. How did she know where the spare key was? Cliff kept it under the third stone in the side garden. I only ever saw him use it once years ago. We stopped hiding it there after the break-in scare. Or I thought we did. Did he tell her? Did he meet her in our garden, hands in his pockets, showing her where we kept our trust? Or had someone else told her? My son. My stomach twisted. He was cold at the service. Not distant exactly, but flat, like he was reading from a script instead of mourning his father. I thought he was just in shock. Now I wasn't so sure because if Cliff made changes to his will or handed keys to someone else, my son would have known. And the way he avoided my eyes that whole week, the sudden drop-ins that didn't last longer than 15 minutes, they weren't just grief. They were guilt or worse, complicity. I didn't ask my son anything right away. I couldn't. Not until I knew how deep the rot went. Instead, I invited him for coffee the next morning. Just like old times. Just mother and son. No agendas, no raised voices. I needed to see his eyes. I needed to listen between the words. We met at a little cafe near the cemetery. His pick, probably because it was neutral ground, public. Easier to keep things light that way. Easier to leave quickly if things got messy. I got there first, sat by the window with my hands wrapped around a lukewarm mug and my thoughts ticking like a metronome. When he walked in, I felt something tighten in my chest. He looked tired, not grief tired. Not like someone who'd been up crying or flipping through old photos. More like someone who hadn't been sleeping because they were waiting for the fallout. He hugged me quick. The kind of hug you give someone you owe. "How are you holding up, Mom?" he asked, pulling out the chair across from me. I shrugged. "Doing 1 hour at a time?" He nodded like that satisfied some emotional quota. Then he picked up the menu and didn't look at me again. "Strange, isn't it?" I said casually, stirring sugar into my coffee. Being back in the condo, I thought I'd never sleep there again. That got a flicker. His eyes shifted, but he covered it fast. "I'm sure it's temporary," he said. "You'll figure things out once the estate stuff clears." Speaking of the estate, I said slowly, "Do you know anything about Dad's will?" Whether he made changes before, he tensed almost imperceptibly. But I've known him since he weighed 7 pounds and fit in one hand.
I saw it.
He didn't answer right away. Took a sip of his coffee first. "We'll find out soon," he mumbled finally. "The lawyer's handling everything. I think there's a reading in a couple of weeks." Then, as if on cue, he changed the subject, asked about my neighbor Joyce, brought up an article he read on grief, and told me he might take some time off work. None of it rang true. I nodded, answered politely, and didn't push because pushing would only make him retreat. And right now, I needed him to stay close enough to slip up. He looked at his phone 3 times in 20 minutes. Each time I mentioned Cliff, each time avoiding my eyes like I was a mirror, showing him something he didn't want to see. "Is there something you want to tell me?" I asked gently, as he got up to leave. He paused, keys already in hand. His mouth opened, then shut again. He shook his head.
No, Mom.
"Just hang in there, okay?" And then he was gone. I sat alone at that cafe table long after the check was paid, watching the cars pass and wondering what kind of man my son had grown into. Whether he'd chosen silence because he was scared or because he was bought. There was a time I would have sworn he'd never lied to me, that he was raised better, taught better. Now I wasn't so sure. And until I was sure, I wouldn't say another word. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because of grief. Not even from the ache that had taken up permanent residence behind my ribs since Cliff died. I didn't sleep because I was thinking, really thinking. For the first time in weeks, I had spent a lifetime trusting people who told me not to worry. Now I was done with that. I waited until the street outside went quiet. Then I pulled the old fireproof lockbox from the top shelf of my closet. Cliff used to call it the vault, like it was some kind of sacred storage. Birth certificates, marriage license, our original house deed, signed in thick black ink the year after our son was born. Back when we thought owning a home meant safety, I laid everything out on the living room table. Wills, 2 versions, one from 2008, one from 2015. Both listed me as executor. Both named our son as secondary. Both clearly stated, all property, assets, and holdings are to pass to my wife, unless otherwise superseded by a formal amendment, unless otherwise superseded. That's the kind of phrase that feels harmless until it's not. If Cliff made changes after 2015, I had no way of knowing. These documents were copies, not originals, not notarized. That's what the lawyer would be reading soon. And if Chelsea had been let in on something I hadn't, then it was in that version. I stared at Cliff's signature, practiced and sharp, and felt a wave of nausea roll through me. Why hadn't he told me? Why hadn't I asked? Because I believed him when he said everything would be mine. Because after 3 decades of building a life together, I thought I'd earned that much. Harold answered my call the next morning like he'd been expecting it. "Ruth," he said, his voice just as gravelly as I remembered. "I was wondering when I'd hear from you. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. Can we meet?" He cleared his throat. "Come in today, noon. Bring everything you have." I hung up and packed the lockbox like it held my pulse inside. By the time I reached his office, a quiet little brick building across from the library, I was shaking. Not from fear, but from restraint, from everything I hadn't said yet. He greeted me with a small nod and that lawyerly look of tired empathy. Not pity. I couldn't stand pity. "I'm sorry about Cliff," he said, ushering me in. I truly am. I nodded. Thank you. But I need to know what he did before he died. All of it. Harold sat across from me, laced his fingers, and sighed. Your husband changed his will. I knew it was coming, but it still felt like being dropped through a trapdoor. When? 6 months ago, he said gently. He changed his executor too. You're no longer listed. My hands went cold. Then who is? Harold hesitated. His face flickered, something between discomfort and caution. A woman named Chelsea. There it was. The name on the knife that had been twisting in my gut since the moment she opened my front door. Chelsea what? I asked, my voice flat. Chelsea, right? He said. She came in with Cliff twice. Once in January, then again in early May. The will was finalized the second time. And you didn't think to call me? His expression hardened. Ruth, he was of sound mind. He insisted it was what he wanted. And frankly, he asked me not to notify anyone else until after the reading. I let that sink in. Sound mind? Maybe, but sound judgment? Did she say who she was? I asked. She called herself his caregiver, Harold said. She'd been helping him during treatment. She had paperwork, non-medical assistance contracts, hospice support, all signed. She wasn't a nurse.
No.
And she wasn't listed on any insurance forms either. That's why it struck me as odd. But Cliff was clear. He said she was important to him. Important. That word tasted like betrayal. Do you have a copy of the amended will? I asked. I can't give you the full text until the reading, he added, lowering his voice. Off the record, I'll tell you this. There's a clause involving a minor child, her son. I blinked. He might be Cliff's. Harold didn't confirm. He didn't deny. Instead, he looked me square in the eye. If you want to contest any of this, you'll need to be ready. Documents, evidence, character witnesses, and possibly a DNA test. I nodded slowly, the pieces clicking into place like a jigsaw I never wanted to finish. Chelsea wasn't some accidental presence. She'd been introduced strategically, surgically into the final months of Cliff's life, and she had the papers to prove it.
But now, so would I.
I left Harold's office with my spine straighter than when I walked in. I wasn't crying anymore. I wasn't even shaking. I was documenting. They thought I'd be too old, too stunned, too heartbroken to dig. But they forgot I spent 34 years loving that man. And if she wanted to stake her claim on my life, she better come armed with more than a signature, because I was done walking away. I wasn't expecting to see her so soon. It was just a regular afternoon. I needed eggs and toilet paper, the kind of mundane errands I used to do without thinking, back when my world hadn't cracked down the middle. I didn't even bother brushing my hair properly. Just pulled it back and put on sunglasses. The last thing I wanted was a confrontation. But there she was, Chelsea, in aisle 7 of the neighborhood grocery store next to the organic cereal and overpriced crackers, pushing a full cart and laughing into her phone like her life had never been touched by loss. She was wearing sunglasses, too, big round ones that tried to disguise how smug her face really was. She saw me before I saw her. I could tell because the second I turned into the aisle, she paused. Her smile didn't falter. In fact, it got wider. Then she said it loud enough for every curious shopper nearby to hear. He was planning to leave you, you know, she said, still holding her phone. He told me everything. I stopped. Not because I believed her. No, not even close. But because of how carefully she said it, like she wanted witnesses, like this was a performance, and I was just a reluctant understudy. I didn't respond. I didn't move. Behind me, someone pushing a cart slowed down. Chelsea leaned closer to her phone. He said he stayed out of guilt, that he owed her time, but he wanted to start over. I left my cart right there, half full bread, detergent, and a box of tea I didn't even like anymore. I turned and walked straight out of that store. My hands didn't shake until I got to the car. I sat in the driver's seat, door shut, engine off, and just let it hit me. Not the insult itself, but how intentional it was. That wasn't a woman overwhelmed by grief. That was someone staking territory, peeing on fences. Chelsea wanted me to feel small, erased, humiliated, and I nearly let her. I gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. My chest was burning. Not from rage. Not exactly. It was something deeper than that, something older. It was the feeling I used to get when Cliff's mother would call me that plain girl under her breath, when I'd smile through it because I was taught not to make a fuss. Chelsea was banking on that part of me still being alive. She thought I'd slink away, tail between my legs, grateful to escape with my name still on a few documents. But what she didn't know, and what I was only beginning to remember, was this. I've survived worse women than her. Cliff's ex, his narcissistic sister, his bankruptcy fallout in 2003. I had stood beside that man through every storm he dragged in. Chelsea was just the final test. Let her gloat in aisle 7. Let her pretend a few forged memories, and a willing child gave her a claim to my life. Let her think she'd won because the next time we stood in a room together, it wouldn't be over produce and pleasantries. It would be at that will reading, and I would not be leaving early. Back home, I didn't say a word. Not to Joyce when she waved from her balcony. Not to the cashier, who always asked how my day was going. Not even to Harold when he left me a voicemail checking in. I turned off the lights, made a cup of decaf, and sat alone in my kitchen as the sun went down. And then finally I let myself cry. Not loud, not messy, just tears sliding down my cheeks while I stared at the chipped tile floor. Remembering how Cliff used to hum while he made his scrambled eggs. Remembering how I'd believed, really believed, that I would grow old in that house, in that life, with a man who told me I was his whole world. But now I wasn't even mentioned in aisle 7 without being turned into a footnote. I wiped my face on the sleeve of my sweater and reached for a tissue. And that's when I saw it. A sticky note stuck between two old recipe cards tucked in the creased spine of one of my cookbooks. One I hadn't touched since Cliff started treatment. It was in his handwriting. I would have known those slanted E's anywhere. Update will final draft in red folder. My heart stopped. I read it again, my breath catching on every syllable. I tore through the kitchen, opened every drawer, every cabinet, climbed on the step stool to reach the highest shelves, checked behind the pots, and under the dish towels. I crawled on my hands and knees, checked behind the radiator, and opened bins I hadn't touched in years. No red folder, but it had existed. He wrote it down with his own hand. And that meant something, because if Cliff updated the will again after the version Harold knew about, then Chelsea's smug little empire might not be built on such solid ground after all. That changed everything. I sat back on the floor, breathing hard. Dust streaked across my knees, and I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not even hope. Resolve. It was the kind of resolve that starts in your spine and works its way up to your mouth until you can finally say, no more. Cliff may have made mistakes. He may have lied. He may have died with more secrets than I ever imagined. But if he left me that red folder, if he really intended for me to find it, then I owed it to both of us to keep digging. I didn't call my son. I didn't want his pity. I didn't trust his silence. Instead, I took out a notebook and started from the beginning. Every visit, every document, every odd moment, I listed everything I knew and everything I suspected. Somewhere in all this was the truth. I just had to find it before Chelsea buried it. The next morning, I went through every closet, every bin in the storage unit, even the trunk of the old Buick we hadn't driven in years. Still no folder. But I didn't stop searching because now it wasn't just about reclaiming a house. It was about reclaiming myself. The will reading was held in Harold's conference room. Long table, leather chairs, and a ceiling fan that buzzed just enough to get on your nerves if you were already anxious. Chelsea showed up 20 minutes late, wearing black again, this time with heels that clicked against the tile like she owned the building. The boy came with her, Elijah, still clinging to her side like a ghost. Except this time, he wasn't holding her hand. She looked straight through me as she entered. Didn't nod. Didn't blink. Just floated past like I was the help. I didn't react. Let her think I was scared. Let her think silence meant surrender. Harold gave her a brief nod, then gestured for everyone to sit. "Thank you for being here," he said, adjusting his glasses. "As per Mr. Thompson's request, I'll be reading 2 documents today. One dated 8 months ago, the other," he paused, dated 3 weeks before his passing.
Chelsea Fleenshead.
She didn't even try to hide it. There's no second will, she said quickly. He signed everything already. That's why I'm the executive. Harold gave her a look that didn't waver. And yet we have two. One of them takes legal precedence. I stared at her, watching the color drain from her cheeks just slightly. Her lipstick looked too red now, her poise too brittle, but it was Elijah who broke the moment. Harold, casually trying to lighten the tension, smiled and said, "And you must be Elijah. I hear you visited the house a lot. What was your favorite part?" The boy tilted his head. "This house." "Yes," Harold replied kindly. "Cliff's house." Elijah squinted. "I've been there only one time." Chelsea snapped her head toward him so fast I thought her neck would crack. She said, voice sharp, "Remember the backyard? The porch swing. We used to play there every weekend." He looked genuinely confused.
No, Mummy.
"I've never played there." The room went so quiet you could hear the clock ticking behind Harold's desk. Chelsea bent down and whispered something into his ear, urgent and low. He pulled away slightly, uncomfortable. The kind of flinch a child gives when a parent's voice stops sounding like love. Harold cleared his throat. "Let's begin." He opened the envelope marked Amended Last Will and Testament. 3 weeks prior, my palms were sweating. I folded them in my lap and looked straight ahead. Harold read slowly, carefully. "To my wife, Ruth Thompson, I leave all assets, property, and holdings unless a DNA test proves the child named Elijah is biologically mine. If he is, a trust will be created in his name, managed until his 18th birthday." I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Chelsea did. She stood abruptly. "That's not possible," she said, voice shaking but still trying to sound indignant. "He told me everything was mine." "Apparently," Harold said, calm as ever. "He changed his mind." Elijah blinked. "What's a DNA?" Chelsea ignored him. Her eyes flicked between Harold and me like she was looking for an exit that wasn't there. I stayed silent. Inside, though, something shifted. Not victory. Not yet, but justice. A sliver of it. Enough to breathe again. Because Cliff hadn't left me out entirely. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was clarity in his final days. But that red folder, it existed. I was sure of it now. And Cliff knew what Chelsea was. Knew enough to tie a string to his name and say, "Prove it." This wasn't over. But the tide had turned. The room stayed quiet longer than I expected. Chelsea didn't sit back down. She just stood there, arms crossed like a shield, lips parted slightly, eyes darting around as if maybe this whole thing was some cruel joke. As if Harold might laugh and say, "Just kidding. Here's the real will. Everything's yours, sweetheart." But he didn't. He just slid the second page of the will forward on the table. One final paragraph, Harold read aloud, "Revokes all previous versions and shall be considered binding as of the date signed 3 weeks prior to Mr. Thompson's passing." Then he held up the document, notarized, witnessed, executed in this very room. Chelsea's face drained to the color of old snow. Her fingers twitched at her sides like she wanted to grab something. The will, the boy, maybe even time itself, and rewind it all back. "This can't be," she said. But her voice had dropped an octave. "He said it was all already done. That I didn't need to worry." She looked at me then, not with pity, not with contempt, but with panic. And I'll be honest, some small part of me, the part that still remembered how to be polite even to my own executioner, wanted to feel sorry for her. But I didn't because I saw the boy flinch when she gripped his arm. I saw the practiced way she composed herself in front of Harold. I saw how she walked into my house the day like I was the inconvenience. Not her. No, I didn't feel sorry for her. She played her hand. And now she'd realized the table was never hers. Harold cleared his throat again. "Given the clause involving potential paternity, the estate is now contingent upon the results of a DNA test. The sooner that is resolved, the sooner we can proceed." Chelsea opened her mouth like she was going to argue. Then Elijah, still holding his juice box from the waiting room, tugged her sleeve and said, "Mommy, do I have to take the test now?" She froze. That hesitation, that silence, that was the moment I knew. She wasn't sure. And if she wasn't sure, then neither was Cliff. I leaned back in my chair, hands folded neatly in my lap. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. But I looked her right in the eyes and held it. Let her see that I was no longer grieving, no longer stunned. Let her see that I was watching. She sat down slowly, her movement stiff, like she'd aged 5 years in 5 minutes. I want a copy of both wills, she said, still trying to sound in control. You'll get one, Harold replied, stacking the documents carefully. But in the meantime, per the conditions outlined here, no assets will transfer until the DNA matter is resolved. I stood gently.
No rush.
My chair didn't even scrape. And when I spoke, my voice was soft, not dramatic, not confrontational. Let us know where and when. Elijah, and I will be there.
She didn't look at me.
She just nodded once, but her hands were still trembling. And mine? Mine were steady, because for the first time since Cliff died, I felt something solid beneath my feet again. This wasn't over. But now I had the will, the lawyer, the timeline, and the boy's own words. I've never been there. Chelsea wasn't a widow. She wasn't a victim. She wasn't even a mistake. She was a plan. And I had just started to unravel it. Harold pulled me aside after the reading while Chelsea was still gathering her things, her fingers fumbling with Elijah's jacket zipper, like her hands no longer belonged to her. He closed the door gently behind us. The hallway outside his office was quiet, lined with oil paintings and years of polite conversations. But this one wasn't polite. This one was war planning. If you want to contest the original transfer, he said softly, we can request an injunction today. But it all depends on that test. Once paternity is ruled out, the house comes back to you. Full stop. I nodded. Then we do it right. Everything on paper. Everything by the book. Do you want to move to reclaim the house now? He asked, eyeing me carefully. We could escalate it quickly if she's already occupying the property. No. I shook my head. Let her stay. Let her think she's still safe.
My voice was calm.
Too calm, maybe. But inside I was burning. Not with rage anymore, but with clarity. She had moved into my home under a lie. Wore her heels on my hardwood floors, slept in my bed, let her child use my guest towels. And all this time, she thought I'd never find the paper trail Cliff left behind. Let her keep the illusion a little longer because once it falls, it will fall hard. That evening, I sat at my small condo desk and typed out an email to a private DNA testing lab recommended by Harold. They replied within the hour. The kit could be ready in 48 hours. Discreet, legally admissible, confidential. The next hurdle would be Chelsea's cooperation. And for that, I had a plan too. I wasn't going to demand. I wasn't going to accuse. I was going to suggest, offer it up like a shared path forward. One reasonable woman to another for the sake of the boy, for closure. Because when people think they're still in control, they show you their soft underbelly. I printed the consent form that night, highlighted the signature line, prepared the cheek swab envelope, and labeled it clearly. No mistakes, no second chances. Cliff had played his game. Whatever confused, cowardly version of love or guilt had led him to rewrite his will behind my back to entertain a woman who now wore my grief like a trophy. And now I was playing mine. But I had rules, legal ones, ethical ones. And if the test said Elijah was not Cliff's son, Chelsea would be out of my house, out of my finances, out of my life. Not by confrontation, but by court order. I called her 2 days later, not with fire, not with accusation. I smiled while I dialed, practicing my voice to sound soft, like an exhausted woman who just wanted peace. Chelsea, I said when she picked up. I thought maybe we should talk. A pause. Then her voice, clipped and guarded, replied, About what, Elijah? I said gently, This whole situation's been hard on him. I thought maybe we could meet. Just the two of us for the boy's sake. Another pause, then a quiet, smug exhale. Sure, she said, if you're ready to be civil. I picked a place she'd feel safe, the little family diner 2 blocks from my condo. Vinyl booths, an old jukebox, pie specials on handwritten signs, familiar, neutral. She wore a pale sweater and too much perfume. Her smile was the kind women wear when they think they've already won. I ordered tea. She ordered nothing. I just want what's fair, I said, letting my shoulders slump like the weight of everything was too much. He was sick, confused. None of this is Elijah's fault. No, she said, lips tight. It's not, which is why I thought. I continued slowly, reaching into my purse. We could just do this the easy way. I slid the envelope across the table. Lab kit, consent form, swabs, already labeled, clean, simple. She stared at it like it might explode. I know this is uncomfortable, I said quickly, but it's required. The will made that very clear. It's the only way the trust can go through for Elijah. She bristled at the word trust. Money was her weak spot. I saw it in her eyes. She snatched the envelope up, flipping through the papers with one hand. And if he is Cliff's, she asked, like it was a trap I'd set for myself. Then everything proceeds as your lawyer wants, I replied smoothly. His name will be on the trust. The house will stay with you. I let that hang in the air. The if made Chelsea bite her lip, not thoughtfully but nervously. Elijah's got school, she said. He doesn't need, it's just a cheek swab. I said, 2 minutes, no blood, no trauma. You can even do it yourself. I leaned in slightly. Unless, I said, calm and steady, you think the results won't match. She stared at me. No smile now. Fine, she muttered, snatching the swab. You'll see. Right there in the booth. She opened the kit, pulled the swab from its package. She turned to Elijah, who'd been silently coloring in a dinosaur picture at the edge of the table, and wiped the inside of his cheek like she was brushing lint off his coat. No hishetashjin. That's how I knew she didn't think she was bluffing. She believed her own lie. Maybe had for so long that she forgot there was a truth underneath. She signed the consent form with a flourish, the same kind of handwriting Cliff used when he was trying to impress someone. She shoved the kit back across the table and stood. Now, she said, smoothing her sweater, maybe you can stop trying to play detective and start learning how to lose. The results came in 7 days later. Harold called just after breakfast. I was still in my robe, stirring oatmeal on the stove when the phone rang. My hands went still the moment I heard his voice. Come in this afternoon and bring her, he said. He didn't have to say what they were. I didn't ask for the outcome. I didn't need spoilers. I just said, 3 o'clock. We'll be there. Chelsea was harder to reach. I had to call twice and leave a message before she finally answered. Her voice was clipped, her tone suspicious. Why can't you just email the result? It's not that kind of conversation, I said. It's official now. Harold wants it done properly. For the record. Another pause. Fine, she said, then hung up without saying goodbye. 3 o'clock sharp. We met again in Harold's conference room. Same long table, same overhead hum, same uneasy silence before the fall. Chelsea swept in, looking like she was headed to court. Blazer, tight bun, long nails drumming against her clutch. Elijah followed behind her, quieter than before, holding a juice box like a shield. I stood as they walked in, gave her a small nod. Thank you for coming. She didn't return it, just dropped into a chair like it owed her something. Harold adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. I'll get right to it, he said. The test was conducted by an accredited lab. Chain of custody intact, fully admissible. Chelsea crossed her arms. We don't need the build-up, Harold. Just say it. He looked her in the eye. Elijah is not the biological son of Cliff Thompson. Silence. I didn't speak. I didn't move. I wanted the weight of those words to settle, to spread. Chelsea blinked, but otherwise didn't react. Not yet. Then she laughed, sharp, breathless. That can't be right. He told me he knew he wanted to raise Elijah like his own.
But he didn't, I said quietly.
I turned toward her, my voice steady, and he made that decision clear in writing. Harold slid a second document forward. A statement witnessed, dated Cliff's final directive that any doubt would require proof that love, real or not, would not override legacy. Chelsea stared at the paper, but didn't touch it. Her eyes went glossy, but not with sadness, with fury. "You think this changes anything?" she said, voice low now, like something sour crawling up her throat. "I gave up everything for him. I left my job. I moved my son across state lines. He promised me we'd be a family." I held her stare. "He made a lot of promises," I said, "but he only wrote down one." She looked at Elijah then, and for a moment, just a flicker, something in her face cracked. Not grief, not shame, fear, because she knew what came next. No trust, no house, no hold, just consequences. Harold stood. "We'll be filing the amended deed shortly," he said. "Effective immediately. All estate matters will proceed per the second will's instruction." Chelsea stood too. Her heels dug into the rug. "You have no idea what this cost me," she hissed. I looked at her. "Really?" I looked. "You're right." I said, "I don't, and I don't think you ever understood what it cost me." She didn't answer, just grabbed her purse, turned on her heel, and stormed out, Elijah trailing behind like a shadow. I sat back down, closed my eyes. For the first time in months, I could breathe. She was quieter the next time we met. Same office, same long table. But this time, Chelsea walked in without the heels, no blazer, no lipstick, just a gray sweatshirt and a tired face that finally stopped pretending. She didn't say a word when she sat down. Didn't look at me. Didn't bring Elijah. Harold didn't drag it out. He laid the file down in front of us, like a closing argument. "This," he said, "is the amended property deed." I stared at it. That paper, that one page with all the signatures notarized, final mine. "For the record," Harold continued, "this deed reverts sole ownership of the marital property to Ruth Thompson as per the final will and supporting legal conditions." He turned to Chelsea. "You will have 30 days to vacate." Chelsea didn't move, didn't cry, but her jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle twitch in her cheek. She finally spoke low, like smoke curling under a door. "He promised me everything." I looked at her, and I didn't hate her. Not exactly, but I saw her now. Not the confident intruder who opened my front door with that smile. Not the woman smirking in grocery aisles. Just a desperate woman who gambled her future on a man who gave her nothing but words. "You are a secret," I said softly. "I was his wife for 34 years. You are a whisper," he never said out loud. Her face crumpled. Not fully, not openly, just enough that her chin trembled and her hand curled into a fist on the table. "I gave up everything for him," she said. "My apartment, my savings. I moved my son into that house."
No, interrupta.
"My house. You moved into my house." She stood up then, slow, like her body hurt. Her eyes met mine, full of something sharp and wet and furious. "You'll regret this," she whispered. And I felt something strange. Not fear, not triumph, just peace. "I already regret trusting him," I said, but not standing up for myself. She turned and walked out without looking back. The door clicked shut behind her like the final word in a sentence I never thought I'd get to write. Harold let out a long breath. "It's done," I nodded. "It will be when she's gone." He pushed the final set of papers toward me. I signed them, every loop and stroke, like sewing something back together that had been torn in half. He handed me the keys. I hadn't held them in months. They were heavier than I remembered. "Do you want me to serve her formally?" Harold asked. "Yes," I said. "In 48 hours," he blinked. "Not today." "No," I said. "I want her to pack with a clear head. I want her to know it's over legally, not emotionally."
No surprises, no dramatics.
He looked at me, then smiled faintly. "You're a better woman than me." "No," I said, standing with the keys clenched in my palm. "I'm just done letting people confuse quiet with weak." I walked out into the late afternoon light, the wind biting at my coat sleeves. The weight of the key ring settled into my coat pocket like an old friend. I hadn't gone back yet, but now, for the first time, I could. Not as a visitor, not as a widow left behind, but as the woman who owned every nail in that house. Let me know in the comments the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. Thanks for watching until here. Please subscribe the channel.